Welcome to the Books of Titans podcast, where I seek truth in the world's great books. I'm your host, Eric Rostad, coming to you from the beautiful Books of Titans studio in Franklin, Tennessee. My goal is to read 200 of the great books over the next 10 years and share what I'm learning. I'll talk a bit about each book, tie ideas together from a variety of genres, and share the one thing I always hope to remember from each of the great books. Today I'm going to cover Van Gogh Has a Broken Heart by Russ Ramsey. What art teaches us about the wonder and struggle of being alive. This is from book 39 of my 2024 reading list. Well, I came across a realization in the early 2000s. And so I think the best way to describe it is just sort of a before and after type of scenario. So before, I unconsciously carried this idea around in my head that to make great art, you have to have been a great souled person. You had to have led some sort of an honorable life. So if you had everyday troubles and pain and heartache, you could not be an artist. You just would not be able to create something of the magnitude of one of the world's greatest pieces of art. I mean, how else would you be able to extract the David out of a slab of marble or compose an opera in your head? And if you didn't have a pure mind, or if you almost like if you didn't have some sort of a superhuman ability. Well, the after part of this is something shifted in the early 2000s, and I started reading about the lives of the artists like Van Gogh, artists that had deeply troubled lives, but somehow created some of the greatest art in the world, art that people fly all over the world to see. So I began reading about composers and authors and artists, and I began to see that a lot of the world's art was forged through tremendous suffering. Many times the suffering was brought upon the artists by themselves. It wasn't like some external thing that was done to them, although that happens a lot as well. But oftentimes it would be decisions that the artist had made or things that the artist had done in their own lives that had led to this intense suffering. And yet they were able to create these just gorgeous and beautiful works of art. So the book I'm covering today is by author Russ Ramsey, and it's his second book about art. His first was called Rembrandt is in the Wind, and I covered that a few years ago when it came out in 2022. And what comes across very quickly with Russ is that you can tell this is someone who loves art. And as such, he wants to go deeper. He wants to learn about the person behind the art. And as noted above, many of these artists' lives are filled with intense pain and suffering. So in this book, you'll come across art that you've seen and art maybe that's new to you as well. You'll see a image of that artwork in this book, and then you'll get to know the story behind the painting. So maybe it's based off a work of mythology or a work of nature or some scene that happens in the Bible. And then you'll get to know the artist's life and especially what was going on in their life at the time that they were doing these paintings. So you've got these three things combined, the piece of art itself, the story of the artwork, and then the story of the artist. And those things combine in this book. But what they do is they cause you to see these paintings in a new light. And it's not like at an intellectual level where you see this painting on an intellectual side only, but you begin to see it on a personal level. And that's because these struggles that the artists are having, they're not unique to artists. They are common to you and me. And so when you're reading about the pain and the heartache in this book about these artists, you can't view it in a removed manner. You begin, if you're like me, you begin to see yourselves in these artists. You begin to see yourself in their art. And then the work of art no longer is an object over there on the wall in a museum, but it becomes a part of you because you're learning about the whole aspect of that painting. And it really takes a master storyteller to invite you into this kind of a connection of seeing all these different pieces come together. And Russ is the perfect person to do that. He makes the art accessible, and then he gives you the permission to like art that you like. So maybe it's not the popular art, maybe it's not what everybody says you should like, but he gives you permission to just start with art that you like and then to explore that art deeper. So no matter where you are on the art appreciation spectrum, you'll get something out of this book because it's not just a surface level about art. It's not just a book about the artists. It's a book about the art, the artists, and their struggles, and how they created items of incalculable worth, yet it was forged out of this suffering. It was forged out of these struggles, and it was forged out of these struggles that are just like the struggles you and I have. So real quickly, this is the just reading stats. I like to share this just so you know how long it might take you to read this book. I read it between December 14th and 20th of this year, and it's a 211-page book. It took me just under 5 hours to read the whole thing. So this is a great use of 5 hours of your life. What I want to do in this episode, I'll just do one segment here, and I will highlight 3 different artists that are mentioned in this work and some information about them. And then I will cover the one thing that I can't get out of my mind after having read this book. Within these 3 artists, I'm going as much as possible. I'm going to try to not give too much detail because I want you to be surprised when you read this book. The first artist is Rembrandt, and there are 2 main paintings that are highlighted in this book, and Russ just ties the story of Rembrandt's life. A lot of pain amidst plagues, marital difficulties, children, the deaths of children, and kind of going through early and late life. And you just see the shift in Rembrandt. And the 2 paintings in particular that are mentioned and shown and then discussed in this book, gosh, I will not be able to look at them in the same way, but it just gives so much more depth to the painting. And one of them is a painting of a biblical scene, but there's something very similar going on in Rembrandt's life at the time. And oh man, just to look at that painting through those eyes and just knowing that it shifts everything. So that's one of the great things about this book is seeing that for a number of different artists. The second artist is one that I was not familiar with, and it's Joseph Mallard William Turner. And Russ talks a lot about his styles of painting. He had 2 main ones through life. And the first, in the early part of his life, was very like you saw the lines, everything was very detailed and that sort of thing. And at the end of his life, the second half of his life, it became more abstract. He kind of led to the Impressionist movement. So you see where it's more the impression the painting makes, and it's not defined lines and details and all that, but just more you come up to the painting and you can see what's going on, but there's not like the straight up building right in front of you that you see all the lines of the building and all that. And so that shift was very interesting, but Russ tied it to deconstruction. And let me just read a paragraph and then the first part of another paragraph just to talk about what that connects to. I can't think about Turner without thinking about the phenomenon of deconstruction. Deconstruction is the process of examining one's faith, asking, what do I really believe? It often comes in response to trauma or a crisis of faith. Many deconstruct when the dogma they accepted as reliable for years proves to be problematic. This is where we do well to ask, what along the way should fall into the category of immutable, fundamental truths that have nothing to do with age or perspective, and what ideas or convictions are up for grabs? Though Turner deconstructed, if you will, he did not abandon the fundamental truths of perspective. And then going on into the next paragraph, the first part, deconstruction for some is a quest for truth. We ask what lines must stay, what dogmas, when removed, have no impact on the integrity of the truth, where has good doctrine been used in evil ways. For others, it can be a little more than an unexamined rejection of a belief system, a pain-driven leap from conviction to cynicism. And I'll stop reading there. But I just thought that was so interesting because he tied that idea of someone's faith, of kind of deconstructing that. And maybe they've reached a point in their life where they just start having these questions. Maybe they haven't been able to ask the questions before, and it's all coming at once. And there's this desire to strip everything and start from scratch. But what Turner did is he still relied on those fundamentals, and there was still a structure behind his paintings. And they became more abstract. They became more impressionistic. They became more about the light and the feel as opposed to these clearly delineated lines, but he didn't abandon everything together. He didn't abandon the lines to where there was no structure at all. And I thought that was such a neat way to consider it, that even in the process of deconstruction, there's still a framework must remain. And to tie that in, it was just brilliant. But then to see how this man influenced even the very next artist who's covered in this book, but then to see how he influenced Impressionist paintings as well was such an interesting thing that I learned about in this book. The third artist was Van Gogh, and the namesake for this book, Van Gogh Has a Broken Heart. And this chapter was just astonishing. I learned things about his ear. I knew he had cut off his ear. I didn't know the story surrounding that, and that was incredible. But I want to read a part that from the very first part of this section about Van Gogh, and then another part at the end. And this is going to tie into my one thing as well. And so Russ is talking about going into this gift shop, and there being these items for sale that make light of Van Gogh's ear, and that he cut off his ear. And that, that's one thing that almost everyone knows about Van Gogh. But he just says that's so disappointing. And especially when you know the story behind the ear, it just, to make it into this chintzy toy is just so disappointing. And so I want to read this paragraph here. The gift shop grieved me in the same way as when I read in Scripture about Simon the leper, the woman caught in adultery, or the doubly vexed Zacchaeus, the diminutive tax collector, people identified by the worst things about them. For some, our most humiliating moments happen for all to see, and the legends of our collapses go before us, casting shade and setting expectations for those we've yet to meet. But for most of us, our greatest disappointments and deepest shames are closely guarded secrets known only to a few, if anyone. Why do we hide our failures and limits? Sure, we do it to avoid embarrassment, but what if the real reason we protect those parts of ourselves is not that they're shameful, but that they're sacred? Question mark. And that's how that paragraph ends. And I just wrote in the column there, I wrote, whoa, just to think about, like, what if the things that we're most disappointed about, the deepest shame that we carry around, what if that is sacred? And the way he talks about it potentially being sacred is later on in that chapter. And so I'll continue reading there. This is in the last couple pages of the Van Gogh chapter. Our sorrows, failures, and afflictions are sacred, not shameful, because they tell the truth about our need for redeeming grace and mercy. So we've got these sacred failures. I mean, have you ever thought about your own failures in that light as it being sacred, or the failures of others? Have you ever thought about it in that sense? So Russ closes off this chapter, and again, this is after you've read about the life of Van Gogh and the life where we know him by one of his greatest failures, the cutting off of his own ear. And this is how Russ ends this chapter. But what about us? What can we give? How do we care for the husband estranged from his family, the woman who can be found at the brothel, or the painter with the severed ear? We can refuse to allow their pain to be the only thing or even the main thing we know about them. We can honor the truth that it is only the visibility of their suffering, not its presence, that sets them apart from anyone else. We can guard their reputations. We can remember, through the example of their tears, that we were created to hope in a joy unseen and to seek to remind them of this, even as they remind us of our need for hope. We can seek to know the beauty they're contributing to the world, made even more beautiful by the way it kicks against the darkness in them. We can join them in this, thereby making beauty of our own. I loved that. Just that idea of a sacred failure, of reframing things in our own lives, reframing things in the lives of those around us. And that so perfectly sums up what this book is about. You're getting to know these artists on a deeper level. You're seeing the beauty that they created out of, a lot of times, out of this suffering. But this is the natural result as you get to know someone more. And I remember having this experience many times on just people I respected, or whether it was musicians I looked up to, or people I respected. And the closer you get, the more you see, the more disappointed you get. And that's natural. That's what's going to happen when we get to know people on a deeper level. So what do we do with that? Do we run away and just look at the failure, let that define the person and kind of back away? Or do we go into that? And this book is a going into that in the sense of looking at their lives, looking at the resulting art, but it's a framework for how we can live as well, how we can go deeper with people, knowing that is going to lead to seeing things on a level perhaps that will not be comfortable. But that last part I read there of just how you can go forward with that, I found that to be so helpful. But just my one thing here is that idea of sacred failures and what to do from there. I thought that was so neat. I want to share just a few other things that I loved about this book. One of the main ones was just Russ talking about his personal stories about art, his gaining a love for art and starting to want to know more about art just in his lifetime, but then also in visiting museums and different experiences he had there. So here are a few quotes from visiting museums, and I thought these are so cool. So here's the first one. There's nothing like walking around the corner in an unfamiliar gallery and seeing a familiar painting for the first time, not knowing I would be in the same room with it. It's exhilarating, end quote. I love that. I've had that experience. And Russ even said he makes it a point not to research a museum before he goes. Sure, he may know some of the art that's going to be in there, but he tries not to know all of the art that'll be in there, just so that he can round that corner and just be surprised. And I've had that experience. I've had it to where it has taken my breath away, and it is exhilarating. This is exactly on point. I love this. Here's the second one. I love to hear the docent say, "Sir, could you please step back? Thank you." And that's the quote. And so he wants to get so close to these paintings that he has to be told by the docent to step away, step back a little bit. So you can just tell again here, Russ's love of art. I want to read two quotes that he has about beauty. This was very helpful, in even tying together with that last quote I read about, joining them, thereby making beauty of our own, but then seeing the beauty that they're contributing to the world, even amidst these sacred failures. So the first, this comes on page 5 of the book. Beauty pulls us upward towards something that calls for some measure of discretion, something to be treated with dignity and care, something sacred, end quote. My whole book project, this reading project, I say I'm seeking beauty and truth in the world's great books. And so any definition of beauty, I'm interested in seeing how that is referred to. And here, beauty pulls us upward towards something that calls for some measure of discretion, something to be treated with dignity and care, something sacred. And that's definitely what I'm seeking as I'm reading these books. The last one here about beauty, this comes on page 102. Beauty is a subset of the sublime, but the sublime is always greater than mere beauty. And that came in a chapter about this sublime in nature, and gosh, that just the distinction in terms there too was very helpful. So in closing, this is such a good book on a number of different levels. If you just are into it for the art and getting to know art, you can do that. If you're into it for getting to know artists at a deeper level, you can do that. If you're in it for getting to know yourself better and seeing how artists with similar struggles to you, what they did in their lives, the ways that they did things right, the way they did things wrong, but possibly not even those being even the right ways to talk about it, of doing things right and wrong, but just look at the beauty that came out of their lives. Look at the artwork that came out of their lives as they were going through these things, as they were going through things that you may be going through, that I may be going through. It's reassuring. It is, it's helpful in taking art to the next level of seeing beyond just something that's on the wall in a museum, but something that can become a part of you, that you can relate to, that you can understand on a deeper level. So in closing, read this book. I hope you do. You'll find it. I think you'll really enjoy it. Russ is a master storyteller, and I love learning about these artists. I love learning about the art and just what went into creating these works of art. I want to let you know about a reading group I'll be leading in this new year, 2025. I'll be doing one. I'm calling it Short Great Books, and we'll be doing one per month. So it's going to be books like The Epic of Gilgamesh or Narrative of the Life of Frederick Douglass. So those are the first two. And it's books that you can get through between 2 and 5 hours. And then we'll discuss them. And so if you live in the Nashville area, in the Franklin, Tennessee area, we'll be meeting in person on the second Monday of each month. Or we'll also be meeting online, and that will be the Wednesday following that second Monday of each month. So all details will be in a link in the show notes here, but I would love for you to join. All you have to do is become a paid subscriber on Substack at any of the levels. You could do that as low as $5 per month, and that will get you the details for how to join on the monthly Zoom calls. But you don't have to go to all of them. You can jump in on just the books that you're interested in. So it'll be flexible, but we're going to be covering some great works. And I hope this could be a way too that just kind of gets you introduced to some of the great works and to show that they're not as challenging as you might think, or I want to show that they are approachable, and that you could study these things for the rest of your life and just keep getting more and more out of them. So I hope you consider joining that, even if it's just for a few of the books during the year. You can also support this podcast on Substack with some of those paid options of $5 a month, $99 per year, or $500 per year. I'm currently reading The Intellectual Life. I'm in my winter month of reading, my winter break. So these are books on my to-be-read pile. And so I'm doing The Intellectual Life, which is, I'm loving it so far. And then I'm probably close out December with Brad Thor's Shadow of Doubt. He is a thriller writer, and his books are so fun. He's got all these connections in intelligence and government. And so when he's writing about things, like you end up seeing them happen in the news later on. You're like, oh, I read about something like that. So they're really fun ways to just kind of get to read a novel, but get insight into what's going on in the world. Well, that's going to do it for this episode. I'd love to get your thoughts on the episode, and the best way to do that is to go to Substack and comment on this podcast episode. That way other people can see that and comment as well. If you have something you need to share or would like to share individually, you can email me at eric@booksoftitans.com. That's Eric with a K. You can follow Books of Titans on Instagram or Twitter, both at Books of Titans. And then I've got a website too with my reading lists and tips and ideas for creating your own reading list. I'll be back next week with another episode. Until then, keep reading, keep learning, and keep listening. I'm out.